We are delighted to have the first talk of the first Web3 track at DevRelCon by none other than Olia, who's going to be sharing with us amazing insights about evaluating developer experience in Web3, best practices and emerging trends. Please give a round of applause for Olia. Standing ovation.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for the introduction. Right, welcome everyone. I'll start with a bit of gratitude. I'm grateful for you all to be here today in this first ever Web3 track at the DevRelCon. In the next half an hour, 40 minutes, we'll be talking about elevating developer experience. So as Ben introduced me, my name is Olia. I've been working in developer relations for just over a decade by now. And fairly recently, I've moved to the unknown of the Web3 world. So this was me probably about 2 years ago. So in this talk, I'll be sharing lessons I've learned and my personal experience in building developer experience, this tautology, along the way. So let's start with the basics. Experience is something that happens to you that affects how you feel. Very simple, but I encourage you all to have that notion in mind throughout this talk, but also when you work on your own developer experience strategies within the Web3. When we talk about developer experience in general, in simple terms, it is an initiative to make it easy for developers to use our technology and feel good about themselves. Oh, I just love the things. Don't you think it's amazing? You can actually give somebody brownie points by pressing a green button, which takes a bit of a second. I was at the airport recently, and I saw a gentleman going for the red one just because his bag got an extra search. I thought it was really quite unfair. But anyways, I'm getting on a tangent there. This is all great that, when we measure how a person is feeling about the service. So our client or customer, a developer in our context in particular. But what's the problem with this? We don't know why they're feeling a certain way. We know they might not be feeling great about the experience, but we can't really change and make them feel better because we don't know the reasons. So before we dive into different components of developer experience in the Web3, I would like to just give a little bit of a context. So we currently estimate about 23,000 to 120,000, according to different sources, excuse me, of Web3 developers in the world. And the lower figure was taken from looking at open source contributions, and the kind of 120 is more sort of across other blog posts and white papers. Whereas the entire developer population is approaching 30 million. So we are looking at about 0.4% of Web3 developers. So why is that? I do strongly believe that the developer experience in Web3 is still very quite fragmented. So the Web3 ecosystem is growing pretty fast with all the different blockchain networks emerging, but they all have different consensus mechanisms, functionalities, features, which makes it really quite hard for developers to navigate and use the platforms effectively. So before we dive into different ways on how we can help those developers on their journey learning about Web3 technologies and our tooling in particular, something very important to think about is who those developers actually are. Because one label for web developers, and we hear that a lot, is quite misleading because everybody's got different motivations, interests, skill sets. And in Web3, that goes even further. So I think this is quite a useful way of looking at the developer audience when you are building developer experience for your developers. So we've got, on one axis, we've got exposure to Web3 technologies in general, and then we've got another axis where we've got experience with your product, service, protocol, whatever it might be. So kind of in the top left quadrant, we've got a developer audience who don't really know much about your technologies, but also are pretty much clueless about Web3 in general. So when you design developer experience for that audience, something to have in mind is that it will be useful to provide additional materials and educational resources for them to kind of understand how the different pieces of Web3 infrastructure fit together. On the bottom right, we've got a developer audience that understand already and have had exposure to Web3 technologies, but don't know much about your product. And from what I've seen working in developer experience across Web3, this group is the most targeted. Everybody wants a slice of that kind of developer community. But the thing is, remember the 0.4%? There are really not that many of them, so we kind of all end up going after the same people. And I don't necessarily say that we shouldn't focus on those developers, but just something to have in mind that this is a bit of a harder group, I guess, to get on board because there's not that many of them. And then top right, we've got another group of developers that already have experience with Web3 and also with your protocol or projects in particular. So when we think about developer experience for them, they might be forgiving that you've got a lack of education resources in one place or the other. For them, they're already building something. For them, what's important is you helping them bringing their project further. So when we kind of imagine the usual funnel of developer acquisition, and we start with we're creating awareness. With Web3, what I find, it doesn't really, when the technology is implemented or deployed, it doesn't finish there. It's kind of the top of the pyramid, which we'd call developer success, where we'd encourage you to really help those projects to start building their communities, and perhaps they could need some grants or funding. So sometimes it's more sort of like introduction to partnerships. So they're building, they're there, but they still need that extra lift. Going back to emotions, as I already mentioned, but I do think that's very important, they do play a key role in developer experience. And I just wanted to illustrate a few examples of what those emotions could be. So we've got positive ones, such as satisfaction, relief, excitement, pride when they've built something and it is working. And on the negative side, we've got boredom, anxiety, confusion, sometimes even imposter. So these are all very useful thoughts to have in mind when you design your developer experience. And the way, kind of the easiest, this is a very easy framework. There's literally 4 questions to answer, but it would really help you to build a roadmap for evaluating and making that experience better for your audience. So the first question to ask is what are the developers' feelings? So remember, it's all about the feelings. Why are they feeling that way? What do you want them to feel instead? And how are you going to get there? So the main 3 components in Web3 developer experience, to me, are ecosystem, technology, and community. And we'll dive in all these components deeper. But before that, I would just like you to show you how you'd evaluate the developer experience that you've got and the feelings that developers are experiencing at this particular moment, and to make sure your strategy kind of takes them from where they are to where they want to be. So we evaluate and answer all those questions that I've just mentioned across ecosystem, technology, and community. I've put a couple examples here, so we'll start with the positive. So for example, developers are feeling intrigued about your protocol, your tech, your project. Why? Perhaps you captured their attention in one way or the other. Maybe it was a Twitter space for somebody with a partner, so you kind of tapped into new developer communities. Now they know about you, now they're excited. So from there, from intrigued, you want them to take them to be enthusiastic, to actually get closer to your community and perhaps start building relatively soon. A way to get them from intrigued to enthusiastic would be provide more inspiration. And an example of that would be organize perhaps an online event and invite your ecosystem projects that are already building and have done something successfully so that they can showcase what they've done. And in that way, newcomers would get more enthusiastic and hopefully will stick and become a part of your community. Another example for technology, so confused is a very common emotion that developers experience in Web3. I see that a lot. And that could be actually nothing to do with your particular technology. It actually could be insufficient technical background in general when it comes to Web3. From confused, let's say you want to take them to confidence. So, they're ready, they believe that they can do it, and they're excited about building. So one of the ways to do that could be assisted learning paths. As an example, we'll take academy, and I'll talk about academies later. And the way you'd evaluate it, you look at successful academy graduates. The final example I've got here is community. Again, a very common emotion experienced by developers when they get dropped to the Discord server of a protocol or a project for the first time, overwhelmed. Why is that? Because there's too much noise and it's really hard to navigate, so developers feel lost. So instead of overwhelmed, you'd like to get them to welcomed. And a way to do that could be structure your communication channels better and enhance the onboarding so they know exactly where to go, who is who, etc. And the way to measure that could be stickiness. Okay, now let's dive into the three main components I mentioned before, and I'll start with the ecosystem. I think actually ecosystem is probably one of the most used terms in Web3, maybe decentralized, but actually, and we really get accustomed to it really quite quickly, but for newcomers, it could be a bit confusing. What is this all about? And it doesn't get easier when you look up ecosystem maps for Web3. So I've got three examples here. The first one is we see a Web3 ecosystem by functionality. The next one is also about functionality, but that's just New York. Look at that. And then I've also included Cosmos Network as an example here. It's a bit easier to read, but imagine as a newcomer, you're trying to figure out what Web3 ecosystem actually is, and then that's what you see. But it is a very... Here we go. It is a very important notion, though, and that's why I started talking about the ecosystem first, because this could be controversial, but I do believe that technology will become commoditized, and ecosystem is actually the differentiator. And it's very important to make sure that the first encounter with your ecosystem is positive. There are absolutely a few examples already in the Web3 space of when the culture goes sour within a certain particular ecosystem, and then the amount of developers joining or the interest just plummeted just because they don't agree with values or the project is going, and it happens all the time. So it's very important to make sure that you've got a strong system with strong culture. And actually, I do believe that developer experience in Web3 starts with non-technical questions, and that's when developers are evaluating your ecosystem. So these are some of the examples that they could be asking before they actually even get to see your technical product, the documentation, or whatever that might be. So can I trust this tech? Who are the people behind this? Have others already been successful? So you do need to make sure that you've got strong answers for all those questions before developers even get to your tech stack. When it comes to Web3 ecosystem in general also, and when developers are evaluating whether they would like to join and be a part of it, a very important notion is interoperability. Why? So the Web3 ecosystem is growing and expanding really, really at fast-paced, and we do see all those blockchain networks, protocols emerging, but there's so much difference between languages that smart contracts are written in, consensus mechanisms, etc. And then it really becomes hard for developers to navigate. And something to really pay attention to within your ecosystem is the interoperability, where the notion of when the protocols decentralized applications, blockchain networks can seamlessly interact with each other and communicate. So a few things there that interoperability helps you solve is fragmentation mitigation, ecosystem growth, standardization and governance, very important in Web3, scalability, resource optimization. I want to vendor lock-in, again, that kind of you do need to provide developers with multiple choices of whatever stack they'd like to use. And of course, there's global accessibility. Let's move to technology. So from personal experience, for developers to justify the time and efforts they spend learning about your tech and actually becoming a part of your community, the technology needs to be feasible, reliable, scalable, secure, and decentralized. And I'll start with the docs, which is part of your technical offering. So documentation is not a learning resource. This is I see this a lot in Web3. I think a lot of protocols and projects confuse documentation with learning resources, and I think the reason for that is that, as we mentioned, there's a lot of developers who actually do need additional context on how the whole web stack works within the Web3, and how all the different pieces fit together and the background, but it shouldn't really, and kind of I see all that information being dumped into the docs, and then the docs become very cluttered, whereas I do encourage you to think of documentation as reference rather than a learning resource, and keep it nice and clean. I do remember us talking a lot previously about actually when we provide information externally, so when we link from our docs elsewhere onto our blog, or I don't know, maybe even like a blog on a third-party platform, that we lose our developers because in their journey, they kind of leave the docs, they go somewhere else, and then they never come back. But I think in Web3 in particular, as long as the journey is clear, this is actually a better way of presenting that additional context. Some of the other common challenges with documentation in Web3 space is rapidly evolving landscape, fragmentation of information, kind of when it's all a bit messy, lack of standardization, assumption of prior knowledge, missing practical examples. So developers do learn by doing, so and kind of understand obviously better when there is a clear example of how something works. Lack of interactive learning, another one. Overwhelming technical details, kind of the other flip side of the coin here. And limited contribution and collaboration. So to make our docs better, we do need feedback from developers, whether it's through pull requests or you're actually actively collecting feedback with other servers. A few ideas on how to make sure your docs are great. Identify your audience at the start, and we did talk about, so you kind of do really need to provide a clear structure for all those developers, or the developers that you're particularly targeting in that, the access that we were looking at. Start with the basics, define the scope. And when I say start with the basics, I don't necessarily mean explain what a blockchain is, but do start with the basics of your protocol projects, define the scope of that. Interactive content and visuals always go a long way. External resources and references, this is what I mentioned before, so absolutely the extra context does help, just not within the docs, and feedback and engagement. Right, moving on to education. So whenever we're building educational path as part of developer experience, I think one of the most important things to remember is that time is developers' most precious resource, and it is really important to try and adjust and kind of make that learning journey for them as quick as possible with providing all the information they need. And we'll start with a few self-paced learning journeys, tutorials and walkthroughs. As the basics, we always had them. Podcasts, I think, is really quite something important for Web3 in particular, because when developers learn about a new protocol or maybe a new interop solution, scaling solution, quite often podcasts is where they turn to learn about it, because I guess it's interesting to hear maybe the founders of the projects talk about where they're trying to take it, what the goals are. There's some really great ones. I think one of my favorite examples is VeraChain, really quite entertaining also. But yeah, highly recommended. Video content is another one. So YouTube is the king. So again, a lot of developers will turn to YouTube to kind of find out about the projects before they actually dive into your docs and your properties on their website. And some more traditional self-paced journeys such as code snippets, sample projects, and ecosystem projects. So if you do have projects that are already successfully built with your protocol or with your technology, do create content about it, so developers also will learn from somebody else's journey. Assisted learning path. So we have Academy, very popular in the Web3. Virtual classrooms, quests. So crypto zombies and things like that really work a treat again. So I remember we always used to say that when we create educational content for developers, it needs to be entertaining and educational, so edutainment. So something to have in mind there, video series, project-based learning. So developers actually get to build something, and in real life workshops. I just realized when I started doing this presentation, I was like, I'll avoid any bullet points. And I think like I did the first third of it, and then suddenly I apologize for all the bullet points. I've got some, I don't know, always had some weird fascination with unordered lists, I think. All right, I did say I'd talk a little bit in academies in particular, because I do think in Web3 they go a long way because there's so much additional context, and then it's a really great way to take developers from zero to hero by providing structured learning courses, but also helps you to create a strong brand presence and community around your tech. So why would developers join academies? The curriculum is comprehensive, expert interaction, experience, community interaction, all the great things that kind of come when you learn something in a community way as part of cohort. Something important here is also certifications and portfolio building. So for those developers focused on career, that is very important to be able to show their achievements and demonstrate that they know how the tech works. A few suggestions with academies. So curriculum, it really depends on the technology and the kind of the volume of information you want to fit into the course. But generally, I think if it's a online sort of remote learning path, so maybe about between 7 and 10 hours a week that you can assume the developers can spend. Screening, highly recommended, but I do encourage you to not dwell too much on the prior knowledge of Web3 because you're eliminating a lot of developers that way. Interactive learning, of course, so it's not going to just sitting through lectures of or like white papers of how things work, but they do really need to build things. Progress tracking, support channels. Support channels is actually a very interesting one. I do recommend. I think it's really, really important to set expectations for developers, how and when you can support them, because there's nothing worse than frustrated developers waiting for the question to be answered, and then you're out of office until Monday. And certification, I mentioned, is really quite important for developers who are learning particular tech with a goal to perhaps start a career working as a Web3 developer in that particular ecosystem. A few examples of really good academies. It might be a bit biased here, but we've got the Polkadot Blockchain Academy, Near, and Cosmos Interchain Developer Academy is also a great course. So it's kind of the best I've seen across the industry so far. All right, moving on to support. Support infrastructure is crucial, and to be very honest with you, in Web3, what I've seen so far, support is actually a mess in the majority of cases. I think there's just so much desire to get the tech out there, and projects get excited, and protocols like come and build with our stuff. But the most common kind of mistake I've seen is projects providing support on a Discord, but what they do, basically there's a channel for every single project building with your tech, and then the engineering team or technical support team have those personal conversations, and kind of there's a lot of like hand-holding. That is all great, but something to remember there, that is absolutely not scalable, but also what I've seen there, same questions being asked over and over and over again in these private channels, and it's just a waste of time, repeating the answers. So something to have in mind. Sometimes it helps, especially at the very early start of your development, to kind of have that one-on-one conversation. But those are all the things to have in mind. But the best way to avoid a lot of questions on your whatever channels you're using for support, Discord or anything else, is actually to provide as much passive support as possible. So a few ways of doing that is knowledge-based tutorials, video resources we've talked about. Third-party sites also, because developers would still, when they're troubleshooting, they'd still search for answers. So that's a good one to look at. screencasts, video walkthroughs, FAQs, Discord resources. Sometimes it helps actually on the server to have resources and break them down. So developers, if the developers are hanging there anyways, that's an easy way for them to find what they're looking for. Changelog, release notes, user-generated content. So developers trust developers. So if you've got a way to encourage those who are successfully building to create some content that then could be a learning kind of support resource for others, by all means, this will go a long way. Sample code and templates and troubleshooting guides are also part of that. There's a few things you can also do proactively. So organizing, for example, regular AMAs, so that kind of the developers within your community know that they can expect on this particular date. And then if you've got a bunch of questions, they can expect having a conversation with you. Technical office hours is a similar thing. Resource bundles, community incentives. Personalized recommendations, a bit harder to get, but still out there, and developer service and feedback collection. So continuously getting the feedback of what's wrong kind of will help you to curate your support resources better. And we have reactive support. So this would be through a channel you provide, so dedicated support channels for developers, especially if your Discord community is shared by maybe end users and developers. It needs to be very clear space for developers to go and ask those questions, and to also make them feel welcoming so they don't feel like they're not going to get their questions answered. It's actually interesting. So from what I've seen so far across the Discord servers, about 2/3 of questions, I would say, either just get one-line answer or actually don't get answered at all. So there's not kind of active conversation there whatsoever across multiple projects. Ticketing system, I do strongly encourage to still use ticketing system, and mainly because it's probably the easiest way for you to evaluate, what questions are being asked, what questions are being answered, how long it takes, so that you can really get better at it. Peer-to-peer, so this is the best way to scale your reactive support, is to engage your community members to help with answering those questions for those who have them. And bots is it's an interesting one. I think we'll probably see this getting better, and I've got nothing against bots. It's just I'm sure we've all had a not so pleasant experience. It doesn't even need to be Web3 or anything to do with development, just generally in life, and it can really get frustrated. So if you are using bots, I do highly recommend that you update your knowledge base where the answers are coming from on a regular basis, and really keep a pulse on it, because it is super frustrating, and you really want to avoid to create that frustration experience for your developers. And finally, we get to community. So community has been a very important part of developer relations for a very long time. So we've been building developer communities ever since. But I would just like to emphasize, I think the kind of the decentralized nature, and also the ownership of assets and data really. The whole notion of Web3 really just puts the community there on the pedestal, and it's very important to get it right. So for developers to stick around, the community needs to provide continuous engagement and also operational support. So the community helps us to elevate developer voices, motivation and engagement, seeing from others, feedback loops for ecosystem development, mentorship support. Your community members help each other. A few ideas on how to build a strong community. So welcoming environment, very important. Engage in conversations. So this is more sort of, we'll see examples on, still a lot actually, on platforms such as Twitter, or I shouldn't say Twitter anymore, should I? Yes, X, where there's kind of, the way of communicating is kind of in this broadcasting manner. So, we're announcing partnerships with Project X, or check out, our new blog posts, and there's not enough engagement in conversations. So that's something to have in mind. Active communication channels. So this is something relevant to Discord servers, and I've seen sometimes you join, and there's channels and channels and channels, and it's all dead, and that is not that's not a good look. given up the stage, so giving the words to community members so they can showcase what they're building, recognize the effort of those community members who help each other, listen and adapting, and of course your ecosystem is evolving, so evolve with the ecosystem. A few community programs that are pretty successful within the Web3 world. Bounty programs, so it could be bug bounty, but just generally. And there's a bunch of different platforms for that now, which is great. Grants and funding, again, so very relevant. How we spoke about those who maybe already are successful and they've got something going. Those developers would need a bit of an extra push with helping them to take their project a level up. Ambassadors, very relevant in Web3. Still content contribution, so that's kind of the user-generated content. DAO participation and partnership facilitations. Partnerships are of extreme importance in Web3 in general. So kind of like help to minimize the whole fragmentation of things and kind of like bring everything together. Having spoken about the three main components, something I'd like to go on to afterwards is great. So once you've done the the evaluation where you want to take your developers and you take your initiatives, this is what I'm going to do. It's very important to measure so you see your results. So I was going to say measure all the things, but then I thought. Olia, do not say measure all the things, because if we start measuring all the things, we've got too much data, too much information, and it will be really hard to focus on what we're actually trying to achieve. So instead of kind of trying to measure all the things, focus on your story. So coming back to when we looked at different emotions and how you want the developers to feel, there were only a few initiatives and only a few ways of measuring that. So focus on that for the time being, and then at the end of the period, reevaluate and kind of go back to, okay, how developers feel now. And then perhaps you'll need to pivot, you'll need to do more of one thing, less of the other thing, and kind of as a result of that review, you'll probably have different things to measure for the next cycle. All right, so what's next in developer experience in Web3? A few trends that are popping up are automated code generation, natural language interfaces, personalized learning paths. So this is kind of something I was talking about at the very start. It'd be absolutely amazing if technology could help us to create that particular journey for that particular developer with those skills and motivation that's very relevant to them. Content summarization and extraction that will help reduce, the precious developer time that they're spending trying to understand your docs. Intelligent search and discovery, and autonomous agents and bots. I've actually recently had conversation with 3 different projects that are building, let's call it a developer relations LLM tool. So this is where would implement a bot, let's say, within a Discord channel, and then the data that we get will help us to understand what FAQs are missing, or what blog posts we need to, or tutorials we need to add, because that's what's being asked. But then on top of that, there is a promise that there'd also be an automated pull request, and if not updated, your docs automatically. I don't know. Sounds very exciting. We'll see. All right, so that was pretty much it. So I do think that the development of tech will help us to create better experiences for developers and help them on their journey within Web3. But something I would like to leave you with is that developer experience, at the end of the day, it is still human experience. And we do need to be welcoming for developers because and take care of the emotions that they have. And that was pretty much it. Thank you. Rate your experience. I will be here until the end of the day, so if you'd like to discuss anything that I've covered so far, I'd be more than happy to. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Olia.